All right, you're on.
Well, you want me to start when I was young, huh?
Yeah, just talk about like, where you were born, where you grew up, maybe something about
Well,
what
I
your
was
life
adopted
was
at 2 years old. Then my folks got divorced when, the people that adopted me got divorced when I was 8, so that left my mother and I. I was not a student, so I quit school at 16 and went to work for the railroad. Mom's boyfriend taught me how to drive, and I wanted a car real bad. And so I got a good job at the railroad real young. We worked long hours, which nobody believes anymore. I worked 10 hours one night, 16 the next, 7 days a week. I worked a year and 3 months without a day off. And I did that for a total of 3 years. I made a lot of money for that time, helped my mother out, and got a car.
What kind of car, do you remember?
My first car was a 31 Hudson limousine. And it was in pretty good shape, but it was really old. And I used to drive a little reckless, and then when I got a little money, well, I moved up to a 40 Pontiac convertible. And the high school, my girlfriend was in high school, and nobody in those days had cars in high school. So I didn't get a high school education, but I did have a car at a young age. And
How far did you go in school? Like, when did you leave?
8th grade was, I never did get enough credits for the 9th grade.
Oh, okay.
But I worked at the railroad, and I was kind of mechanically inclined. And they took the streamliner off at that time because the railroad, as I know now, was slowly being folded up, and the stockholders were going to sell it out. But back then, this was the big boys don't tell you, and later you find out what's going on. But the Fairbanks Morris diesel engines that I worked on were a streamliner, and they took the passengers off. So they liked me at the railroad. They were going to make an engineer out of me and run the trains. And I went out, I took my student trips, and I went out and was a fireman. Now, there isn't many people around even now that can say they fired a steam locomotive. Plus, I worked on a steam locomotive. But I didn't want to sit all day in a cab of a truck, in a cab of a locomotive. I wanted to work with my hands, so I went back and got my good old boss and says, I don't want this, I want to be a machinist. He said, okay. I started my apprenticeship. Apprenticeship was 5 years then, and they drafted me right in the middle of it. So it took me 7 years.
So you had to finish one rotation and then go again?
Well, what I did is I had about a year and a half in apprenticeship, but then the U.S. government says show up in Seattle, you're going to be a soldier for 2 years.
That was for the Korean War.
Yeah.
Korean War. So then, when you come back, your seniority, when I become a machinist, I got 2 years seniority on the machinist list because it wasn't my fault. And my job was waiting for me, my apprenticeship. So I had 3.5, 4 years, whatever it was. It was by the hours what it actually was. Then I become a machinist, and then I worked 33 years for the railroad until it folded up. And then I retired. was in the Army, I got married the first time. And she was wild, and we were good because we traveled from in the Army, and I could live off the post. And after 4.5 years, well, I could see I wasn't going anywhere, so I filed for a divorce. And
So how old were you when you got married the first time?
21.
21, okay.
I got drafted and married the same month, 21.
And where did you, so you were stationed in Seattle, or?
First I went to, well, they gave me basic training in Fort Lewis. And they give me 6 weeks instead of, they give me 8 weeks instead of 6 weeks because we were going to Korea. And then we turned in everything and lined up, and we were going down the dock and go to Korea. And then we didn't go anywhere, and so we just slept on the springs that were left in the barracks. And then the next day we sit in the field all day, and then we sat down. And we ate up where the MPs were. They didn't know what to do with us.
Were you trained like infantry, or like what were you going to do in Korea, or what did you think you were going to do?
Well, they were going to decide that when we got there.
So they just did regular basic training, and then they were going to ship you out.
Regular basic training with 2 weeks added to it. Supposed to toughen us up a little, so when we went, see.
You'd be good to go.
But then after 3 days, they changed their mind, and they put us on a troop train, sent us to El Paso, Texas. And there they put me in an anti-aircraft. And we had these great big guns. And we'd go out in the desert and shoot them at targets and come back, big guns. And we did that for a year, and then they sent us up to Toma, Wisconsin, where the winters are about 20, maybe 30 below, because that's the way it was getting in Korea, and a lot of the people were freezing. They were going to get us so we could stand the cold. And I was there a year, and then they decided to move us down to Chicago and set up our guns. We got brand new guns. The first guns we couldn't hit anything, nothing. The new guns we couldn't miss, technology. And they put those guns in the vacant lots down in Chicago. And it was really different because Chicago is busy, and we're using outdoor bathrooms in the middle of a great big city. And we had these crossed huts we were living in, and the people would drive down the main highway there, and they'd look and couldn't believe it, and then they would hit the car that stopped ahead of us because they were rubbernecking. And we caused more crashes out there. Finally, they got used to us. Chicago was good duty. If you wear a uniform in Chicago, they treat you good. You couldn't even buy a dinner in a restaurant. Somebody'd buy it for you. That's where I got discharged, out of Chicago. And I had a car by now. Joe and I had a car, so we drove home.
Back here?
Back to, they give me 6 cents a mile to get back to Washington and go to work for the railroad again. And then, well, when I filed for a divorce, I went swimming up at American Lake, and I found my beautiful wife.
What did you think? What did you think?
No, that
the
was
first
high
time?
dive, Craig. Not
High dive.
Like high dive.
Yeah, high
Yeah.
dive. Oh, Lake Surprise. Surprise Lake. High dive.
Well, it was actually high dive back in the days when they called it.
Yeah.
That was where it was.
I was living in a, where you stop, hotel,
Apartment.
where we stop, why can't I think of the name? That's trouble getting old now. Motel. I was living in that motel in 5, and we were dating, and then we got along real good, but I was waiting for my divorce, and so we decided that we'd get married when I got divorced, and I had a big 98 Oldsmobile convertible then, I was always a car nut. And so Marilyn got in the convertible and we went up the courthouse, and I went in and got a divorce and walked down the steps and got in my 98 convertible and went to Idaho and got married. So I was single for 6 hours. And that was 57 years ago, so don't tell me it don't work.
It was, that was when I met Craig up there at High Dive. Karen, we was up there to a picnic, Mom and Dad, and Karen and I. And Craig had this beautiful Oldsmobile, and all shiny. He kept it all so shiny and everything.
Red leather seats.
Craig wanted to ask if if he could take me home, and so of course I took Karen with me. And back then, why they didn't have seat belts or anything. And Craig was old. Karen was, of course, had her little hands on the dashboard because they didn't have seat belts. And Craig, he never said a word. And here was Karen with her little hands and over there and on his shiny dashboard, but he never said a word. And I'd get a block from your house and I'd get my rag out and wipe them off. I couldn't handle it. After he dropped Karen and I off, why then, of course the folks had gone home earlier, and then we had gone for a ride, Karen and Craig and I. That was just that was kind of comical.
Yeah.
That was a comical event.
Oops.
Have you got it off now?